Okay. So here we go. We are now up to the 8th plague. Plague of Arba, locusts. Okay. So, would anyone like to read in your Chumash? We're on page 374. The beginning, the beginning of Parak 10.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his courtiers, in order that I may display these my signs among them, and that you may recount in the hearing of your sons and of your sons' sons how I made a mockery of the Egyptians, and how I displayed my signs among them, in order that you may know that I am the Lord." So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, "Thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may worship me. For if you refuse to let my people go, tomorrow I will bring locusts on your territory. They shall cover the surface of the land, so that no one will be able to see the land. They shall devour the surviving remnant that was left to you after the hail, and they shall eat away all your trees that grow in the field. Moreover, they shall fill your palaces and the houses of all your courtiers and of all the Egyptians, something that neither of your fathers nor fathers' fathers have seen from the day they appeared on earth to this day." With that he turned and left the Pharaoh's presence. Pharaoh's courtiers said to him, "How long shall this one be a snare to us? Let the men go to worship the Lord their God. Are you not yet aware that Egypt is lost?" So Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh, and he said to them, "Go, worship with the Lord your God. Who are the ones to go?" Moses replied, "We will all go, young and old. We will go with our sons and daughters, our flocks and herds, for we must observe the Lord's festival." But he said to them, "The Lord be with you, the same as I mean to let your children go with you. Clearly you are bent on mischief. No, you menfolk go and worship the Lord, since that is what you want." And they were expelled from Pharaoh's presence. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Hold out your arm over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come out upon the land of Egypt and eat up all the grasses in the land, whatever the hail has left." So Moses held out his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord drove an east wind over the land all that day and all night. And when morning came, the east wind had brought the locusts. Locusts invaded all the land of Egypt and settled within all the territory of Egypt in a thick mass. Never before had there been so many, nor will there ever be so many again. They hid all the land from view, and the land was darkened, and they ate up all the grasses of the field and all the fruit of the trees which the hail had left, so that nothing green was left of tree or grass of the field in all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh hurriedly summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "I stand guilty before the Lord your God and before you. Forgive my offense just this once, and plead with the Lord your God that he but remove this death from me." So he left Pharaoh's presence and pleaded with the Lord. The Lord caused a shift to a very strong west wind, which lifted the locusts and hurled them into the Sea of Reeds. Not a single locust remained in all the territory of Egypt. But the Lord stiffened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go. By the
Thank
way,
you.
In the Upper Peninsula, before July, there's a wind that blows in from Lake Superior and blows all the bugs into the Upper Peninsula. You just cannot hike without inhaling bugs.
Ew.
And sometime around the 4th of July, the wind shifts and blows all the bugs out into Lake Superior. So that's the time to go camping. It's between July, the 4th of July and Labor Day.
Oh, I'll try to remember that.
That's when you go hiking.
Thank you. That's pretty cool. I'm glad that this class is so relevant to...
I just had a question that just occurred to me. It seems like every time a plague comes along, that there's enough to have destroyed. It doesn't seem like the plagues before them destroyed enough of anything. I mean, you would think that up until now, that there really wouldn't be anything for the locusts to have to do.
Yeah.
Do you follow what I'm saying?
Right. Well, we need to remember that the different plagues were aimed at different aspects of Egyptian society. So it's not like every plague was attacking the crops. Only certain plagues attacked the crops. And so with the hail, it says specifically that certain crops had grown enough that they were broken and killed, and other plants were just starting to sprout, so they were softer and so they didn't get damaged. So then the arba came and ate those.
Okay.
Or I mean, that's also why I think it was by Dever. Some of the commentaries said that when it says all the animals, it obviously doesn't mean every single one of them. It just means a lot of them, most of them.
I have a concern, Rabbi,
Okay.
on verse 17.
Yeah.
Forgive my offense just this once and plead with the Lord your God that he but remove this death from me. Why is but there?
Because in the Hebrew it says rak, which means only. V'yaser me'alai rak asamo, says that he removed from upon me just or only this death. It sounds to me like an expression of desperation. Like if he would only get rid of this. So that's the only thing I can think of right now.
Okay.
Okay, but pun not intended. So your point about what's left from the previous plague, like this one, it keeps on referring back to the hail over and over again. Also, if you notice, when the locusts come, they darken the sky, like the next plague. So locusts were definitely sort of integrating the plagues before them and after them. Other possibly interesting things here. Pharaoh's advisors seem to really have enough by now. Like, they tell him, let them go, Egypt is lost, like we're done for, just give in already. And then he doesn't. He prefers to haggle with them. It's like, oh, I'll let these people go, I won't let them. This is what you really want. And it doesn't work. So let's explore these locusts. Let's dissect them, as it were.
You have to say that was intended.
That was definitely intended. I think we dissected grasshoppers when I was in high school.
Yeah, I remember dissecting grasshoppers. Then it was a frog.
I mean, I avoided the whole dissection thing. I wasn't interested in it. I let my cousin do everything. Okay, so let's see.
I promise this is the last time this session I show up late.
Where's your wife?
Welcome.
Okay. My wife is doing what wives, she sends her regrets, but it turns out for us this week is, next week is Pesach for us. And what? She's got a lot of stuff to get done, and wanted to express her regrets.
That's understandable. Okay, so
Sorry.
Dissecting locusts.
Locust, nice.
so if we look at the second source here on the locust sheet from Midrash Shmot Rabbah. Tell me if this sounds familiar. So it says, I will bring the locusts into your territory. And the Midrash explains, and not in the territory of the children of Ham. For through the plague of Arba, they recognized where was the border of Egypt. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah. We've had this before.
Yeah.
And remember which plague?
Beasts or something?
Or Goshen was separated.
Yeah, right.
Right, so Goshen was separated, but this isn't talking about distinguishing between the Egyptians and the Israelites. This is between the Egyptians and other related peoples.
Was it the hail?
No, it was the frogs.
Oh.
There's a similar midrash that says that the frogs brought peace between Egypt and Cush, which is Ethiopia or Nubia.
Their borders.
Right. finalize the borders, because you could see, oh, the frogs are here, therefore it must be Egypt, and they're not there, therefore that must be not Egypt. And all this seems to be based on the fact that the Torah is over and over again stressing that these plagues are happening bigvulecha, in your territory, within your borders, directed specifically at the Egyptians. Okay. And then the Midrash goes on. It says that Moshe saw that the advisors were turning to each other and believing his words, so he left to give them an opportunity to advise Pharaoh to repent. One of the goals that we've been seeing in various commentaries and Midrashim, the question of, are they there to punish? Are they there to get them to repent? Are they there to force the Egyptians to let Bnei Israel go, and it doesn't matter what they're thinking about it? And so here it's taking the position that not only are the plagues being sent to get the Egyptians to repent, but when Moshe sees that it seems to be working, he sort of steps back and lets them do it themselves. As opposed to the other positions we've seen about the plagues being just sort of like beating the Egyptians down, beating down Pharaoh, forcing him to do what God wants. Here it's presented as impelling the Egyptians to figure it out themselves and come to the proper conclusions. Okay. Let's skip down to the next page, top of the next page. Okay. This is a fascinating midrashic style commentary from Rav Meir of Rothenburg, early medieval scholar in Germany. Does anyone else want to read?
The locust rested on the entire territory of Egypt is related to God rested on the seventh day. From here we learn that the locust too rested on the seventh day.
That's obvious.
That's weird.
It's weird.
It's weird. It's like the locusts are. What does it mean that they're resting on the seventh day? That the day that they happened to land was Shabbat, or they hung around for a while, and on the seventh day that they were there, they just decided to stop eating everything, and then they went back to it afterwards.
So what does it say? They covered the surface of the land. Is that they're resting?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
Because they weren't flying around?
that's
Right.
a relationship.
Right. So what could be the connection?
It's like, do you walk to school or carry your lunch? I mean, there's no connection.
There's got to be a connection. There's got to be a message here.
Yeah, right.
So what's
The locust rested on the entire territory of Egypt, and that's related to God resting on the seventh day.
because the word rest is involved.
Where is this? What line in the Chumash is it?
This
I was looking at
is
number 5 on page 375.
this is
I don't know, why does it say 2011?
this is on page 376. It's Pasuk 14.
Locust had they Egypt.
Yeah, in the translation here it says settled within all the territory. The verb is vayanach. They rested or settled down.
Is that the word that's used in the Ten Commandments, or in the creation?
Yeah. No, it's actually referring to the Ten Commandments, where it's describing Shabbos and saying God rested on the seventh day. Vayanach v'yom hashvi.
Oh, yeah.
From Shemot, Parak 20.
Shemot 12:11, 20:11. That's what it's like.
Yeah.
So it's just that they're just playing with the word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, not just playing with the word. We can figure out some deeper message here.
Yeah, I mean, they're making a pretty bold statement here.
Right. So what's one possibility of what's going on here is what are the reasons for Shabbos? Like, what's Shabbat about?
Day of rest.
To emulate God.
Okay, so day of rest to emulate God who rested. So, so there's an idea that it's not just emulating God, it's sort of testifying to God having created the world and rested. Which does seem to fit in to one of the purposes of the plagues, which is to make Pharaoh and the Egyptians recognize God. And so it could be that the sort of the thematic or philosophical connection here that Rav Meir of Rothenburg is connecting through this use of the verb to settle or rest could be that just as Shabbat is meant to be a testimony to God, God's power, God's creation, so too that's what the purpose of the locusts was. To show the Egyptians that God is here and God is telling them that they need to let Bnei Israel go, and that they need to recognize God's power. Just one possibility. Any other ideas?
We're trying to give Rev Meir of Rothenburg's some meaning here. Is that it? We're
Yes.
trying to find what the heck he was talking about.
Yes.
So here we learn that the locust too rested on the seventh day.
Yeah.
Seventh day.
So he's connecting the words. Same word. This is a very typical midrashic style analysis. Because the question is, what kind of meaning could there be underneath it? Because it's not just a word game.
You mean what kind of meaning there could be because the Torah uses the word ve'anach here and in the Shabbat situation. That's what we're not what Mayor Rothenberg said, but because the ve'anach is used in both places.
Well, no, I mean, that's what he's saying. He's saying ve'anach is used in both places. Therefore, there's some kind of connection here. And he says the locusts too rested on Shabbat. So I'm asking, what could the philosophical implication of that be? Or what's the metaphorical meaning? Like, is he just telling us that the locusts wanted a day of rest also? Or is there some other message here?
Well, let's see. The 6 days of the week are mundane. Shabbat is holy. So is there a difference between holy and mundane? I don't know. Can't. This is which plague is this? The 9th?
Eighth.
8th plague.
There are no other additional ideas. We can move on. I just wanted to give opportunity for...
Is there something you see right in front of us and we're not just, we're just not picking it up?
No, I already said the one that I saw. I was just wondering if you saw something different. Okay, but we can move on.
But what's interesting to me is that the editor of this book, of this Chumash, does not see that connection because he didn't translate it as rested, even though it's the same word.
Right. Well, that's
They chose not to translate it that way.
That's the difference between a midrashic style read and a pshat style read, which is more contextual and sort of the flow of normal human language. Like, this is a verb that can be used in many different contexts where it means different things. So in the pshat style read, then you just say, oh, it means something slightly different here, so we're going to translate using a different word. Midrashically, though, you say it's the same word.
Yeah, if they don't make that
Has
note,
to be a connection. Huh?
They don't make any such note for your benefit either.
Well, right, because they have to make a decision. You always have to do that when you're translating. And it would get pretty hefty if they tried to reference every single midrash and every single commentary and the different possibilities of what every word could mean. Okay.
Is it when God rested on the seventh day, his creation was over.
Right.
So maybe by this plague, we already know We already know. I mean, it's the event horizon. We know it's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's over.
Oh,
I don't know.
Things
Could
in
be.
tens.
I mean,
Things in tens in Jewish relate to other things in tens.
okay.
So is this the inverse of something else? Like, is like this number 8 on the way down something, the same as number 3 on the way up of another 10?
I don't know. I've never thought about that. And we could look at things in tens, like the Ten Commandments, and see if it matches up. The eighth of the statements
Are there
in the
tens?
Sefer Dibrot
These
is
are all
don't
destructions.
steal.
These are all items of destruction. So are there
Right.
10 items of creation?
Yes, there are 10 statements of creation in Bereshis. 10 times that God says, "Let there be blah," and then there's blah.
Okay, so is this the inverse of number 3 on the way up? Like, what's number 3 on the way up?
Let's
These
see.
are all destruction.
Right. So you're saying that it should go backwards.
Yeah. But this could be, that's a ladder stepping up. This could be a ladder stepping down. And it could be the
That's
inverse
fascinating.
of that 10.
This is like the kind of thing that we need a lot more time
Enough
to
time.
dedicate to separately from this. Okay, so God says, "Let there be light."
Because
so there's darkness.
the killing the first one, it's destruction, and let there be light. Let there be light. That's creation.
Okay, and then the second one is the rakia, the sky,
So
separation.
Sky versus darkness.
And then
That's an inverse.
the third one is the gathering of the waters on the third day. So that there's water in one place and land in another place.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. I mean, the next one is about the plants. It looks
So
they're
the
eating the
plants grew,
plants.
and then these
but
guys ate it.
Could be. Could be.
Maybe, so again, this isn't the same, this is a different idea, and it's probably,
There could be other ideas. I mean, that's within the
probably not.
possibility.
That probably was the best idea, by far. So I have a little less creative idea than that one.
Okay.
So maybe it's this idea that the locusts were there to destroy everything that had been sort of left behind.
Okay.
So it's like the inverse of creation. So God created the earth and then rested, and here God has essentially destroyed everything and rested. Maybe there's a symmetry there.
That's
Okay.
kind of similar.
Thank you, Counselor.
Could be.
I mean,
But like I said, exploring
if
this
you're trying to find
particular
a reason that they
analysis.
Yeah, we're-
used both
we're
places,
digging.
and we believe that God obviously put it in there. Nice job. I mean, there must be some reason, and that isn't likely it. But
What's the next one?
what the heck? Okay, that was fun.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Yours is way too complicated.
I was thinking, it's 10 of something, so there are tens of others elsewhere.
Okay. The next
Into the
two.
darkness.
So I find the next two midrashim particularly exciting. Who wants to read the Midrash Lekach Tov, which starts out by explaining why locusts are called arbe.
Locusts are called arbe because they are harbe, many, as it says in the prophecy of Joel, God's great army. The locusts would eat and not be eaten. They would fall on the face of the Egyptians, eat them, and poke out their eyes.
That's pretty gruesome.
Yeah.
It's more in the horror movie-esque kind of depictions of the plagues. So the locusts were like...
What is the prophecy of Joel?
So one of the 12 short prophecies, the ends of Nevi'im, Treasar. So one of them is Yoel. And in his short book of prophecies, he has this description of a plague of Arba. Not this plague of Arba, a later infestation. And he describes them in excruciatingly frightening detail. And he calls them God's great army. Because they come in large numbers, they destroy everything. So the Midrash seems to be taking that image and sort of extending it to the nth degree. Like, oh, they're God's great army, then they must be actually attacking the Egyptians, like soldiers, and not just destroying the crops. Hence the image of them jumping on their faces, eating them. Yeah.
Specifically talking about their eyes.
Yeah. So notice how it says they would eat and not be eaten. Let's look at the next Midrash. Let's read the next one.
The ones that are, no, it's which is the one that's kosher?
Yes.
No, I think there's some locusts.
Yes.
Some varieties of locusts.
There are four. So first of all, locusts and grasshoppers are the same thing.
Oh, okay.
I learned this thanks to the internet. That locusts are species of grasshoppers that swarm.
Okay.
So it's sort of a function name, not a biological name.
Well,
And there's 4 species of locusts/grasshoppers that are kosher. They're listed in chapter 20-something of Vayikra. And one of them is arbe.
I think we just read it last week, didn't we?
No, I think it's in Shmini, maybe, that I think it might be.
Are they parv?
But
Are you?
Yes, they're parva. Yeah, they're parva-like fish.
Did you get my email?
In the Mishnah, when it talks about kashrut of different creatures, it frequently bundles
Nicely done.
fish and grasshoppers.
Really?
So it'll be like blah, 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 meat, blah, blah, dairy, blah, blah, fish and grasshoppers. Okay,
Interesting.
so,
But I mean,
Yeah.
the thing is that it was, they were, I mean, it struck me that they were talking about would not be eaten,
right.
but,
Well, do you have any recipes?
well, but the thing is, it's the fact that they could be kosher, it's not, that big a deal because it's the Egyptians that they're talking
Right.
about. So it doesn't,
True.
I can't make that connection. I mean, that's what I was thinking, but then,
But the law of kosher hasn't been given yet.
oh, sure it is, because the Revelation goes in all directions.
Oh.
But was that good certainty voice? I just want to know.
Yeah,
Well,
you got me believing it.
Certainty
Caveats
wise.
were
Come on, there's something to that.
That was pretty good, yeah. Okay, so I mean there are midrashim that make these statements, like saying that our ancestors kept the whole Torah,
Right.
even rabbinic legislation that had not yet been legislated. So there are
And
such
this is the
ideas.
answer you get. That it's like you went in all directions. And it's not so easy to understand that. And it's right that the timeline doesn't seem to be observed always in these interpretations, but
Right. There's a lot of different interpretations of what those statements mean.
Yeah.
Like, does it mean they actually kept these laws as they would be later? Does it mean that they lived their lives according to the moral principles that the laws teach?
Nah, they just winged
Or is it just some kind of philosophical idea
is that a locust
that didn't
reference?
actually fit into the story practically? But speaking of locusts,
What do you? I mean, do you subscribe to one of those? Rabbi?
I think it's unlikely that they were actually keeping the laws as the laws would be later.
So a heretical rabbi. Oh my goodness. Nice.
Okay,
That was a compliment.
it's not so heretical.
No, but I'm saying, okay. No, I mean that
Maybe
okay.
in some places,
Yeah.
but
Not here for sure.
Not here, not where I live either. But
Okay. No, I mean, there are some people who would never say that.
right.
but they're outside of the borders.
Does that mean that the locusts won't get them?
Right.
Yeah.
And they don't have to
Maybe
step in that.
maybe it's
that
better to
frog
be there
squish.
then.
Yeah, that's gross.
Okay, so when I was in 6th grade, I had a teacher in school named Miss Sue Berry, who was Yemenite. And she told a story about her father growing up. I don't know if it was in Yemen or after he moved to Israel. And there were locust swarms.
Last year there were locust swarms in Israel.
But these were previous ones. This wasn't about last year. So I don't know if they did this last year, but what they did in these previous locust swarms is after the locusts came and ate everything, they would be like us after we eat a big meal and just be sort of lazy and lethargic and lounge around on the branches of the trees. And the people would take big baskets and sticks and hold it under the trees and hit the branches and hit the trunk of the tree so it would shake, and the locusts would just fall into the baskets, and they would take them home and eat them. Because when locusts come and eat all your food,
The food's in the locust.
exactly, so the only thing left is to eat the locusts. Which could be the reason why locusts are kosher in the first place. Because God is saying, listen, if you don't have any food, then I have to give you something to eat.
It's a weird thing to be kosher.
Right.
isn't it?
An
Really
insect
is.
like that would be,
Yeah.
but that makes sense.
They do chew their cud, though. They look, when you're looking at them, they do chew like whatever.
Okay,
It's not
Split
bad.
antlers too, I think. Yeah.
so who wants to read the Midrash Tanchuma here?
Antlers, whatever.
Right.
Thank you.
Rabbi Yochanan said, once the locusts came,
Happy point.
the Egyptians were happy and said, we will gather and cook them and fill barrels with them. God responded, evildoers, you're happy about this plague that I have brought upon you? Immediately God reversed the wind to a very strong west wind, which lifted up and carried away the locusts. Not a single locust remained in the entire territory of Egypt. Even those that were in the cooking pots and the pickling barrels hopped up and flew away.
Pickled locust.
Zombie pickled locusts.
Yeah. They could get up and fly away.
Does anybody
You don't like
sell
it? I love
locust?
This one?
I feel like I've seen people
Yeah.
eating grasshoppers,
Yeah,
like
see.
chocolate-covered grasshoppers or something. I don't think any of them have like kosher certification though,
Like, why would it be? Why would you have to get a kosher certification?
because it might be the wrong species,
Oh,
Or they have
Or-
to, they have to,
or there might
they
be,
have to be checked right.
or there might be something non-kosher in the chocolate or
Oh, okay.
something else how they do it.
No, but I mean, there have been some places where they certify venison, right? And that's not, an easily obtainable. You don't have herds of deer in most places. I mean,
Right.
so why not? I'm just curious.
Probably because there's not a large market for it.
But how do you know? I mean, no, you're right.
Every
It's
few
probably,
years-
if there's supply, if there's demand, there'll probably be supply.
Every few years, some of the large kashrut organizations host these big meals that they call Masorah dinners, because the point of the meal is to propagate the traditions of identifying all these weird kosher creatures.
Roast
And
giraffe.
yeah, and so they eat things like
Giraffe chews its cud?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Giraffe has split
But you
So there's
climb
a
on the ladder
myth.
and-
Yeah, I'll stick my neck out
Yeah.
and say
So
what
there's a
giraffe's
myth
kosher.
that people say that you can't eat giraffe because you don't know where to shecht it on the neck, but you can actually shecht it anywhere on the neck. It's just a very large neck. The reason we don't eat giraffes are because one, they're endangered, and two, they can kill you with one kick.
Oh.
But at these Masorah dinners, they eat grasshoppers and strange birds.
Oh, so they do.
and
So
other
somebody
things.
out there is doing that.
Yeah, but only a small group of people who pay a lot of money for it
Yeah, but if you
once
eat-
every few years.
Yeah, that was a nice
Okay,
comment
so-
you made, but it was quite a reach, it seems to me.
Yeah, right.
Oh.
Yeah.
So the funny
He
part
asked
is
for
that
it. He asked for it.
if you're eating the food that's in the grasshopper, then you're eating what he makes out of the food too. Otherwise, do you gut them and then eat them?
I don't know. I'm sorry.
All right.
I haven't done that much research.
Let's move on.
Notice how in this midrash, the Egyptians want to eat the locusts,
Yeah, so
and God says, no, there is no silver lining to this cloud of locusts. Like, this is a plague. This isn't a smorgasbord. My army of retribution is not a crunchy snack. You cannot eat the locusts.
Well,
I love
almost,
this
it
midrash.
almost looks like the Egyptians almost one up God here, almost.
Right.
And then God gets like, well, I'm God.
But here's the thing about
Right.
that.
Yeah. That's why I
So-
don't like that one. But anyway.
This is a midrash.
Right.
And Rabbi Yochanan is saying, once the locusts came, the Egyptians were happy.
Right.
But I thought that we were getting to the point where the Egyptians were worn down.
Yeah.
They had seen God's power. They had been, worn down by all this. This is the 8th plague.
Well, the courtiers were.
And their animals were dead.
Yeah.
And their crops were destroyed, and they didn't know what they had to eat, how they were going to survive, and then, oh, locusts!
Right,
The
but
locusts
just
are eating
seems-
all our food, but we can eat the locusts.
I get that.
I don't think
It
it's
just
saying that they
seems-
were like throwing a party. I think it means that they were
Well,
like,
it says
at least
they
we
were
can
happy,
eat the
but-
locusts. And God says no.
It just strikes me as a little bit arrogant at that point. And it's not very contrite to say, you know, that, well, you know, at least now we can eat the locust because,
That's the point. It isn't contrite. And that's why God is saying you're missing the point. You just think this is like a happy coincidence, like, oh, at least we have something to eat now. But there's the...
But how could God miss his mark like that?
Oh, so you're saying that it was a mistake? Or
Well,
it was...
sounds
it was
like, I mean, like, it's like, oh, darn, I shouldn't have sent the locust. They like that.
Ah,
I mean,
right?
it's,
And then God had to take action to,
Yeah, it's like,
to
oh.
fix the mistake.
interesting. I think this whole thing is based on the fact that the wind comes and blows them out of the country, which we can connect to the frogs rotting and what we saw about the arov and the argument about whether they were insects or animals, and the question of did they leave also? So one of the proofs for the side that said that the arov were were animals and not insects, was that they were removed at the end of the plague, because if they were left there, the Egyptians could have benefited from their skins. So similarly here, Rabbi Yochanan looked at the story and said, oh, God blew them away at the end instead of leaving them there. So what would have been the benefit to the Egyptians if God would have left them?
they could have eaten them. Right, gotcha.
How do locusts normally disappear? When a swarm comes in, does the wind blow them away? Do they die? I mean,
I don't remember.
Anybody knows the answer,
They
but
just go to the next field,
yeah,
don't they?
they go to the next field. Then all of a sudden they're not there.
oh,
Ah, they just move on then.
move on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like other swarms. Okay. Like a virus. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
It's a Japanese.
Which also goes to the issue of, are they learning anything? So according to this midrash, they haven't learned anything.
Right.
They're just the Egyptians. They're just trying to get around the plagues by piggybacking on whatever benefit they can find in it. And God is saying no. Like, I'm trying to teach you a lesson here. There's only one way to stop the plague, and it's not by eating it. It's by letting Bnei Israel free. Okay. Darkness. Just as the locusts darkened the sky, foreshadowing the next plague. But okay, so okay, here we go. We're at the bottom of page 376 in your Chumash. Shemot, Parak 10, Pasuk 21. Then the Lord said to Moses, hold out your arm towards the sky, that there may be darkness upon the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be touched. Moses held out his arm toward the sky, and thick darkness descended upon all the land of Egypt for 3 days. People could not see one another, and for 3 days no one could get up from where he was. But all the Israelites enjoyed light in their dwellings. Then Pharaoh tries to give in. Pharaoh's heart gets hardened again, and he changes his mind. Okay.
And what stands out is you can touch the darkness.
That's what we're going to concentrate on. It's really weird. The verb in Hebrew is vayamesh. Vayamesh choshech, which seems to come from a root meaning to touch or to feel or to be tangible. And so what does that mean? So if we look at the first commentary here from Shadal. Someone want to read?
Take a turn. The correct explanation is that the darkness was felt. It's just an expression, like they felt darkness and not light, which means they groped around in the darkness. So too here, there was darkness until they had to feel around in the darkness as a blind person does. And so in the Targum Yerushalmi, they felt around in the darkness.
sort of a straightforward, contextual, pshat, language as it is used kind of explanation.
Okay, is this the same Shadal that you said says everything?
Yes. Yes, it is.
It's the same Shadal that says what?
He likes quoting like everyone under the sun.
Oh.
Like, so he was maybe 200 years ago or so in Italy. And so he likes quoting all the ancient translations into Aramaic and Greek and Latin and medieval Jewish commentators and contemporary Christian commentators in his time and sort of the new theories of the early modern Bible scholars, all the kinds of stuff. Okay, so we're going to move in a direction from Shadal's sort of pshat. Oh, it's an expression. It means they had to grope around, feel around because they couldn't see anything. In a more direction towards the more drashic, towards the more literal. Okay. Who wants to read Ibn Ezra, or should we just sort of go around?
Nothing about.
The darkness was a vapor so thick that a person could feel it.
Okay, so we're getting a little more physical. It's not just, oh, there's no light. How do I see? I need to feel my way around. It's like, oh, there's something there that's blocking the light. Like when you're in a cloud or in the fog. Okay. Sforno.
God removed the natural darkness of night, because after all, night darkness is just air open to receive light, and its darkness is due merely to a lack of light, whereas the darkness was air unable to receive light due to its great thickness. So it was a completely different entity.
Yeah, we're getting a little bit more scientific
even
here.
lighting a candle wouldn't do it because everything's covered in something.
It was filled with darkness. It wasn't
Exactly.
empty waiting for a candle,
Right.
according to this.
Okay, the next source here is, I think I've mentioned this. Moses, Man of the Mountain is a story of the life of Moshe by this mid-20th century anthropologist and folklorist named Zora Neale Hurston, based on African-American traditions.
Want to hear a story about her? She was a housekeeper. She was somebody's housekeeper.
Okay.
She wasn't making any money. She wasn't getting rich from whatever it is she was doing. She was somebody's housekeeper. The housekeeper, or the lady, happened to be like an anthropologist or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so she read something by Zora Neale Hurston, and somehow or another, the housekeeper said, "Yeah, I said that," or something like that. She says, "You are Zora Neale Hurston?" And it was. It was, her housekeeper was this lady that she was studying.
Wow.
Anyway.
Well, this is something that she said. So basically it's a...
The housekeeper was her?
Yeah. She was working as a domestic.
Cool.
She was black.
You gotta make a movie. No, really. That sounds like a... Okay, keep going.
I mean, it's a good movie if it has a happy ending. I don't know if about her biography to know how it works out. But so the fascinating thing about this book is that, like, we talk a lot about slavery in Egypt and these some of the gruesome or graphic midrashim about what it was like. But the traditions that she's drawing on are from people who actually experienced it themselves much more recently than our ancestors did. So when the first time I read this book, it like gave me the shivers. It was like very creepy. Because like the way they describe slavery is like, that this is coming from people who really knew what it felt like. So here she has a description of the plague of darkness. Moses went out of the palace and lifted his right hand, and the light began to thicken. There were no clouds in the sky. The world just began to grow dim. By the time Moses got home, it was dusk in mid-afternoon. Then it went on from there. Egypt knew darkness, living, crawling darkness that had a life of its own. It had body like the wind, and it heaved in motion like the sea. I just find this fascinating because I don't know where she got this from. Like whether it's a parallel evolution of interpretation. This idea that the darkness must have been more than just the absence of light, but some kind of smothering physical manifestation.
Wait, why do you think she didn't get that from Jewish scholars?
Because she wouldn't have gotten it from Jewish scholars. Because she was collecting African American oral traditions. So the question is, if slaves before the Civil War somehow picked this up from Jews or from Christians who got it from Jews, or
He probably just got it from
who knows?
the Bible.
Right, but the question,
Yeah,
but because it all depends on how you translate that verb. So, I just love this image because it's not just sort of this smothering thickness. It's alive, it moves. It's sort of, I don't know, malevolent.
It's not just the absence of light, it is
Right.
something else.
Right, and you can feel it. Okay. So there's another midrash that gets a little more technical. How much was that darkness? A rabbi said it was thick like a dinar,
Can I ask you a question?
like a
So-
coin.
So just to go back to Zora Neale Hurston.
Yeah.
So what is your exposure to her? You know, she's not a midrashic source.
I took a class in college called Blacks and Jews in American Cultural History. And one of the books we read was Moses Man on the Mountain. That's how I discovered that.
Who was it taught by?
It was taught by Professor Jonathan Karp.
Fishy about that.
Yeah. He's a professor at the State University of New York in Binghamton.
That's where Rabbi went to college, by the way.
Really?
Yeah.
Did I know that?
You know it
I feel
now.
like I should have known that.
You know it now.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's a good place.
You know who else went to Binghamton? Is the lady that's on the Progressive commercials with the lipstick.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Flo?
Yeah.
Okay.
cool. Okay. Okay, so who wants to read the next midrash? So this is a very popular midrash.
What was the connection of the thickness to the dinar?
Oh, they're quantifying it. Like, so they came up with this idea that it must have been tangible. So they ask, oh, if it was tangible, how tangible was it? How thick was it? What was it? Give me a measurement. Let's quantify this plague. And so they say, oh, it was thick like this coin, like a dinar. So we're going to see later someone who tries to use this to get a sort of an unexpected twist on the description of the plague. But so far, it's just describing the thickness of this tangibility. Okay, who wants to read this?
The first 3 days, whoever was sitting and wanted to stand up could stand, and one standing who wanted to sit could sit. And about these days it is said, there was deep darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. No one saw anyone else. The last 3 days, whoever was sitting was unable to stand, and someone standing was unable to sit. And whoever was sprawled out could not straighten up. And these days is said, no one got up for 3 days. About these days.
So here we have two different stages in the plague. The first is normal darkness, can't see anything, but you can grope around, like the earlier commentaries we saw talked about. Whereas the second stage is the new physical stage, where it's smothering, trapping, imprisoning the Egyptians.
That's taken from what words?
That is taken from the fact that the Torah says, no one got up for 3 days. You can get up in the darkness.
Uh-huh.
So why couldn't you get up? I guess it was more than just the lack of light, especially if we have that verb that seems to mean became tangible.
Right.
So hence this midrashic flow.
The Peshat view of it would be, you didn't get up because every time you got up, you bumped into something.
Yes.
And you finally realized, okay, enough.
Right.
We're gonna wait for the light to come back on.
Probably.
Okay.
Although there are other reasons why you might not want to get up, and we'll see that later.
Okay.
Okay. Ready to move on?
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to see now two longer excerpts from Aktav VaKabbalah. And the first one, we're going to see something he does a lot, which is connecting what's going on in the text of the Torah with midrashic traditions and trying to explain how it may seem weird and not pshat and not what's going on, but he tries to draw out what the logic is. What could it be saying? What's the connection? Okay.
There was darkness only for the eyes of the Egyptians, and nothing could help them, just like someone who is blind or who completely lacks eyes. And it's not that they were struck with blindness, their eyes were healthy as before. Instead, God performed a wondrous miracle and sent out darkness from the treasury of God's anger, and this darkness performed the action of darkening, creating something up close against their eyes to prevent the evildoers from benefiting from the light. It was a tangible object which physically blocked the sparks of light, similar to a cataract on the eyes of a blind person. And what our sages said in riddle form, how much was that darkness? Thick like a dinar, taught us that the heavenly lights continued working as normal. So too, it was not vapors or smoke that darkened the land, but instead, God sent darkness directly to darken the eyes of the Egyptians, and it had physical reality and a thin tangibility like a blind person's cataract. This is the reason why they could see nothing, not by the light of day and not by the light of candles. And our sages compared its thickness to the thickness of a dinar, for the dinar was the thinnest of all coins they had. And through this comparison, they taught two things. First, that the darkness had no negative effect on an Israelite who was standing next to an Egyptian, because it was just a thin covering against the Egyptian's eyes. And therefore, the Israelites had light in their dwellings. And second, that this thin darkness had substance and strength, like a minted and solid golden dinar, so that no sight could get through it, and therefore they could not see each other. They did not see each other.
So he's taking the idea of the tangible darkness, but instead of it being vapors or some kind of smothering thickness in the air, it's very personal. It's just like it's right here. It doesn't affect anyone else. It just affects the Egyptians themselves. And everything else in the world is going on normally. He says the heavenly lights, the sun is rising and setting, the moon is rising and setting, the Israelites are going about their business, everyone in the world is going about their business, while the Egyptians have this sort of cataract that's preventing them from seeing. So that's one description he gives. And now he gives another one, using other sources.
Let's look that up.
Many people question, it is not in the ways of darkness to imprison a person such that they can't get up from where they are sitting. Since blind people, too, walk around in the darkness, although they must feel their way.
So bumping into things would not necessarily cause them to just stay at home.
And if it was because of intense vapors or smoke that thickened the air such that the Egyptians could not get up, how could they breathe air? In an instant they would die from asphyxiation. Reb Naphtali Hertz Wesley said that here, truly, the Torah is unclear, but in our tradition the matter is explained. For the poet said, God sent against them burning anger, wrath and fury and trouble, a delegation of messengers of misfortune, or of evil angels.
This is a pasuk in Tehillim and Psalms, which we actually use in the Haggadah.
Mm-hmm. This matter of the delegation of messengers of misfortune, which the poet said is exactly that which is said in the lost Second Temple era Jewish work, Chochmat Shalomo. They were scattered under a dark veil of forgetfulness, being horribly astonished. and troubled with strange apparitions. Noises as of waters falling down sounded about them, and sad visions appeared unto them with heavy countenances. There appeared unto them a fire kindled of itself, very dreadful. For being much terrified, they thought the things which they saw to be worse than the sight they saw not.
So they're seeing something.
So the Egyptians shook from the strange visions they saw, disturbing images that appeared to them for the purpose of terrifying them. And from this, their minds left them due to the great fear, and their strength vanished until they were no longer able to move from their places, like happens to a person in shock from a sudden tragedy that occurs to them, and they are unable to move from their place because of the shock to their minds. And that is why they did not get up from their places during the time of darkness, because none of them had the will.
So they got food poisoning from locusts. They
And hallucinated?
Yeah.
Well, they didn't get the food poison from the locusts because they couldn't eat the locusts. The locusts escaped.
You're right.
Yeah.
But this one fascinates me even more than the zombie locusts flying away. Like, darkness isn't dark, he's saying. He's like, there was stuff in it. They saw things.
Yeah.
And these things they saw, he connects it to this pasuk in Tehillim, and he says, oh, they saw the messengers of misfortune. Whatever it is they saw were these angelic anger beings.
Band of evil.
Yeah.
How is the Second Temple era Jewish work lost, and we have a quote from it?
Because we lost it, but luckily other people who had translated it into Greek and Latin and similar languages decided to incorporate it into their scriptures, and so they kept it around. We did not keep it around because we didn't see it as divinely inspired, even though it's definitely religiously valuable, and so we lost track of the original. There's a number of books like that.
Maybe the pronunciation of Yud He Vav He is in there.
I've never heard of that. I feel like if it were in one of the books that we still have around someplace, then I feel like we would know about it. There could have been other books that explain stuff like that. But okay, so it's not just darkness that terrifies the Egyptians. It could have been stuff in there, which also opens up the question again of what the point of the darkness was among the plagues in general. Like, if it was there to punish them, then this interpretation definitely sounds punishing.
I think I've been under that dark veil of forgetfulness. I feel like I forget things. What is that? What is a dark veil of forgetfulness? What is the imagery there?
It could mean that being so frightened of what they're seeing made them forget anything else. I don't know. That's how I would interpret that verse.
Struggling with this one.
But if it was there to teach them a lesson, and the lesson being that they need to repent or recognize God and recognize that God wants them to let Bnei Israel go, then we might want to lean more towards the sort of the physical, crushing, tangible darkness interpretation. Like in this quote from this then high school student in New Jersey who wrote a very nice Dvar Torah on the internet a number of years ago, where he says the Egyptians were trapped and completely lost their freedom of movement. Now it was Bnei Israel who had independent mobility, while the Egyptians were confined like slaves. Hashem punished the Egyptians midah keneged midah, measure for measure.
So where's this kid now?
He is now in rabbinical school.
JTS?
YU.
Why not?
Yeah, the first time I saw on Facebook that I have friends who are friends with this kid, I like completely geeked out. I was like, you know Sam Reinstein? I quote him when I like teach people about Choshech. He's a genius. I don't know anything about him, but but he wrote this great Dvar Torah. Okay. So we have one plague left.
So a lot of the plagues we explained it, midah keneged midah. But did locust? Do we do that on locust?
Okay. So there was one here that I skipped actually, that had a midah keneged midah interpretation. Okay, if you look at the bottom of the first page. So in Midrash Hagadol, it asks, for what reason did God bring upon them the locusts? Because once the hail struck and broke their grapevines and fig trees, the Egyptians said, it is good for us, because whoever previously could only collect a little could now collect a lot. All the fruit was now scattered on the ground, so it was easy to pick up. Therefore God brought upon them the locusts, and they ate all the plants of the land, whatever the hail had left. So no, sorry. That doesn't midah keneged midah. No. I was confused. Why? Yeah, that's not midah. That's more of that's like the we want to eat the locusts, so no, you can't. Okay, I think we'll see a little bit of that at the end, actually. Okay.
Why locusts? Okay.
Okay. Bechorot.
Yeah.
Okay.
So before we go on,
Yeah.
so I'm just reading some of these other midrashim in this text. What is? I hope I'm allowed to ask this question in this class. So what when we get to the 9th plague,
Right.
Are we to understand that there's some order of these plagues? That is to say, somehow in ascending effect.
That's what we're gonna do
Okay.
after this.
Okay. Okay. I'll wait then.
Okay, so just hold your locusts. They might try to jump away. Okay. So there's a lot of stuff in the Torah about this plague. God tells Moshe that there's one more plague that's going to come. And at the same time, God tells Moshe to tell Bnei Israel to borrow from their Egyptian neighbors various valuables. And the Torah...
Does God wink when he says that? Borrow.
Oh, maybe. I mean, there are different interpretations about whether the verb actually means borrow or ask for. But
aren't there drashas that say that they're just getting paid back the wages of their slavery?
yeah, exactly.
Right, but you don't borrow if you're getting
Yeah.
paid back your wages
Right.
of slavery.
Right, but if you have to trick them into paying you, then you might call it borrowing. It all depends
You
on...
borrow it and then you say, well, I don't have to pay you back because you owed me all this money.
Right, so that's one possibility. Another possibility is that the verb doesn't actually mean borrow. But the Torah informs us that the Egyptians at this point felt positively towards Bnei Israel, and they respected Moshe. Everyone seemed to respect Moshe and like Bnei Israel at this point, except for Pharaoh. Keeps on ruining it for everybody. And so Moshe informs the people that the last plague is going to be God going out around midnight and slaying all the firstborns in Egypt, from Paro's firstborn to the firstborns on the lowest level of the social hierarchy, the firstborns of the slaves, the firstborns of the prisoners, all of them.
There's a reference to borrow here, by the way.
Yeah, it's that verb, which could mean borrow or could mean ask for. Okay, and then there's an interruption in the story where God teaches Moshe what Bnei Israel should do to sacrifice the first Pesach offering, how they're supposed to eat it, which we sort of reenact at our seders with the matzah and the maror. We don't put blood on our doorposts, though. That could get messy, but that's what they had to do. And God says, this is the top of page 383, "For that night I will go through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and I will mete out punishments to all the gods of Egypt. I, the Lord." Another line that we use in the Haggadah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then God gives the sort of general laws of Passover, all about leavened bread and unleavened bread. Moshe gives the instructions to Bnei Israel about what they're supposed to do. And then the plague hits. Top of page 387. "In the middle of the night, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And Pharaoh arose in the night with all his courtiers and all the Egyptians, because there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was no house where there was not someone dead." And they finally tell Moshe and Aharon to take Bnei Israel and get out.
I just found it interesting that Pharaoh didn't die.
Right.
Because he was supposed to have been a firstborn, right? He's
Right.
king.
So there are a number of commentaries that say that Pharaoh was a firstborn, but he was specifically left alive so that he would learn this lesson.
How about he really wasn't the firstborn?
That could also be possible. I mean, you're assuming that he was a firstborn, and then the question is, should he have died or should he have not have died? If you assume that he's not a firstborn in the first place, then...
That's the whole thing.
Could be.
They were just that depraved.
Wait, who's depraved?
They killed the firstborn cows too?
Yep.
What the heck cows were left after all those plagues?
You weren't here when I asked that.
What?
You weren't here when I asked that. Right
Oh,
at the beginning.
sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
So we've seen that phenomenon earlier, where one plague will say, and all the animals got killed. And then the next plague says, yeah, there were still some animals left to get hit by this plague too. So basically, some of the commentaries that we saw said that when it says all of them, it doesn't really mean literally, hyper-literally all. It just means in general, or most of them.
Gotcha. And of those who were left, only the firstborn were killed.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Okay, so let's look at Ramban, Nachmanides. Anyone like to read?
My turn?
Sure.
Go.
Yeah, I think it was my turn. The reason it says God gave the grace of the Israelite nation, sorry, is that what it said?
Yeah.
And the reason it says God gave the grace of the Israelite nation in the eyes of Egypt.
Meaning the Egyptians are now positively disposed towards Bnei Israel.
Oh, gave the grace of, okay, thank you. Is that the Egyptians did not hate them because of the plagues, but would love them more and more and appreciate them, saying, we are the wicked ones who committed violence against you, and it is proper that God should show grace to you. Even Moshe, who was bringing the plagues upon them.
That's a good reading of human nature, isn't it?
I can't tell if
No, it's,
you're being serious
no, I'm absolutely not. I mean,
or sarcastic. Okay.
you know, I mean, how can, this is Ramban, so, is he serious?
I think he's serious. And I think he's saying that this, because it says God made them feel this way. It's unnatural for them to feel this way.
And for them to acknowledge God as God with a capital G,
Right.
right? I mean, that's the whole thing. That was part of the whole goal here, was to get the Egyptians to acknowledge that.
Right. And so this seems sort of like a happy ending. Maybe. Like, the Egyptians don't hate Bnei Israel. They're like, we were wrong. You're right. We're glad that your God is, like, rescuing you from all the bad things we did to you. Like, this is a happy ending. It's pretty cool.
Well, you know what? Bob, what did you just say? I didn't get the... Were you being...
This is so opposite of human nature. You know, they just lost an entire war. Do you think that after World War II, the Germans said, you know, I love you Jews. You know, we really wronged you. We shouldn't have done that.
But that is kind of what the Germans did. In the end, they said, we feel so bad about what we did to you that we realized you weren't so bad. In fact, you were probably somebody that we need to now reach out and I mean, you know, far be it for me to comment, but you know, if they were talking to their shrink, the shrink might be saying, hey, you got to stop blaming them and realize that you were the reason for all this. And maybe you need to reach out and touch somebody's hand. Reach out. Somebody's hand. But I mean, I understand what you're saying. I agree with you that it's sort of against human nature, and that's why there's so many therapists working. But the point is that it's almost like the result of the therapy session. It's like they're saying.
Well, this is the total, you know, best case outcome of a therapy session.
Right.
That they would come out like this.
Well,
Right. Which is...
God is the ultimate therapist. So,
He's got a PhD. He's got the words.
That is every PhD.
Yeah.
There's this...
but up until now, the Egyptians, we see, like in each plague, that the populace is kind of acquiescing to all this. It's only Pharaoh that's not. You know, and this doesn't say Pardes was the one that said this. It says
Right.
the Egyptians.
It's the people, the common people.
Yeah. The ones that already said, like, you know, 4 plagues ago, let them go already.
All right,
Right.
but then it's another step to say, well, you know, these guys are really great. You know?
You slaves.
And we were the wicked ones. Yeah. Oh.
Although, do we understand that the average Egyptian had a slave? Or, you know, like we think of in the South here where people had slaves? Or was it the government?
The government.
That had slaves?
We generally assume that it was the government. There are some midrashim and commentaries which seem to describe that at a certain point, the common people sort of took advantage of the national status of the Israelites as slaves in order to make use of them themselves, besides just Bnei Israel having to work on what the government wanted them to do.
But in general, they didn't. I mean, we don't understand them to be. That wasn't part of the culture.
Right.
That everybody had their Jewish slave.
Right. Correct. Because remember, they mostly lived in their own area in Goshen.
Right. So maybe that's what Paul's saying. That really maybe they realized that the government's treatment of the Israelites had caused all this you know, all these plagues that was, of course, in the wake of the killing of the firstborn. I guess it is hard to imagine that if their firstborn was just killed, that they would then somehow be praising the slaves. So maybe I'm coming around to your way of thinking there, Mr. Levine.
Happens sometimes.
Rare, but
Okay, well then, if we're coming around to the other side, then let's look at the next one. This is from a guy I know here in Detroit.
Ken Chelst?
Yep.
How do I know that name? Where does he work?
Wayne State, I think.
Okay.
I think he also works for some companies doing operations research.
It's a vaguely familiar name to me. I know him.
Okay.
Anyway, go ahead.
So he wrote a book called Exodus and Emancipation about comparing and contrasting the story of Bnei Israel in Egypt with the history of slavery in America. And so in here, he says, the biblical commentaries discuss the inclusion of the firstborn of the lowest caste in this decree, when it says, even the firstborn of the servants, even the firstborn of the prisoners. According to Rashi, these groups had rejoiced in the pain and suffering of the Israelites. This is a common phenomenon in history. Lower-class whites in the South, who, if anything, were hurt economically by slavery, took great pride in their own freedom and contributed to the daily anguish of black slaves. It's a thing that happens. If there's someone below you...
Is that true?
Yeah. From historical evidence.
Okay.
But the thing that happens that we even see in sort of small social dynamics, a lot of times the way that people feel good about themselves is by beating down on whoever's underneath them. And if they're just the second from the bottom, then whoever's right on the bottom is going to get it. And so according to Rabbi Chelst, quoting Rashi, the reason that the plague of the firstborn extended not just from Pharaoh and the ruling classes, but all the way down through Egyptian society was because if you were an Egyptian, you knew that you were always above the Israelites. And it seems that maybe they took advantage of that. Okay. Chizkuni, yeah. What was a Chizkuni? This is something that I never thought about until I saw this commentary. So they're supposed to paint the doorposts, and I always just thought, oh, they're painting the doorposts because it's like a gate. You're marking the doorpost. The destruction is going to come in. God will hop over it. Whatever. Pass over it. But Chizkuni points out that they had to paint the doorposts and the lintel so that the blood would form the letter Chet, protecting the doorway so that the destroyer would not be able to enter, because Chet stands for Chaim, life.
So why in this plague, all the other plagues, the Israelites were protected. So why in this plague would they have not been protected? Why did they have to, this one was my question last week, why did they, this is the only plague where the Israelites had to do something. They had to be interactive in the plague. Why wouldn't they be protected in this plague? Why did they have to paint the doorpost and be involved?
Okay, so if you flip the page, there's a Rashi on the back, which makes the claim that once permission has been given to the destroyer to attack, it no longer distinguishes between righteous and wicked.
Once the hit is made.
Right. This is sort of an everyday phenomenon that we see in our normal lives. When there's chaos, when there's danger, people get hurt. And it doesn't always follow sort of what we might want to assume and believe that, like, oh, if you're good, you get rescued, and if you're bad, you get what's coming to you. The world doesn't work like that. A lot of times, something bad happens, and both bad people and good people get caught up in the tragedy. And so it could be that Rashi is saying that this plague got up to a certain level of danger, the sort of direct killing, reached a point where it just sort of became a force of its own, which sort of contradicts the other view we have stressed in the Haggadah, where it seems to say, God is doing it, God's self, no one else is helping. It's very willful and specific and calculated. Whereas here, Rashi is presenting another image where sort of God is just sort of like releasing this destroying force into Egypt and letting it run its course. So separate from that, you could also say that this is the end. This is the end of the process. Bnei Israel are getting out of there in the morning. And so it's the last chance both to get the Egyptians to repent and release them, and to make sure that the Israelites are worthy and that they believe and they're willing to go along with it.
Plus, this is just the first thing the Israelites had to do. They actually had to get up and go. So that's more than just, wiping, painting the doorposts.
No, I'm talking in relation to the plague, as far as
Right, well,
the
I
actual
understand.
plague.
No, but I mean, it's like Beheloska for the plagues. It's like they actually have to get up and they have to start doing something. Rather than having things done for them. I mean, isn't there another principle that first God gives as a gift something that is valuable, but then you can't really own it until you earn it. So you're given it, the gift as a taste, and then you have to earn it to have it. So we were given all these plagues, and we were basically given freedom. We didn't have to do anything to get the benefit of the other plagues, but now it's work. In order to actually have freedom, we have to walk. We have to earn it.
Right.
You have to get up and go.
Right. They had to earn it. They had
They didn't throw the Egyptians away from the Jews. The Jews had to go away from the Egyptians.
Right. And they had to have the strength of will to go out and take the sheep, even though the Egyptians wouldn't like it, and slaughter the sheep, and paint their doorposts, and have this meal, and get ready to go while they're eating it, showing their faith in what God is telling them, and then eventually walk. But they had to take all of these steps beforehand. So you're right. And so it could be that at this point where everything's coming to a climax, this is the point at which they finally have to take that final step and say, yes, we are in.
Makes sense to me.
Makes sense to me too. Okay. One other interesting thing about the plague of the firstborn is God says that God is going to punish not just the Egyptians, but also the Egyptian gods. And so we could say that we've seen this already, like when the Nile turns to blood. God is saying, oh, you worship the Nile, that's dumb. I'm going to show you that the Nile is just a putrid mess of dead fish. Ha. Or you worship the sun, too bad. I'm going to make everything dark. Ibn Ezra has a very interesting take on this, on the first side of the page. He quotes this idea from someone else. He doesn't say who. He says, some say that the Egyptians became furious at their gods during the plague of the firstborn and destroyed their monuments. That when God says, I will judge the gods of the Egyptians, what that means is I will make the Egyptians so desperate and frustrated and angry at how their deities are letting me beat up on them that they themselves will reject them and destroy them.
So just to clarify, so not all the Jews left, and the families of the Jews that didn't put the blood in their doorposts, they lost their firstborn as well. Is that the case?
Possibly. The Torah never tells us specifically that happened, but it's possible. Okay, we only have a few minutes left. We have very little time left. So, let's try to bring it all together, all of these plagues, and see one perspective on how they all fit together and what the strategy is that that God was putting forth in bringing the plagues in this order and these types of plagues upon the Egyptians. Does anyone else want to read, or should I just do it?
Go ahead.
Hit it.
Okay, so this is from Shamshon Raphael Hirsch. And this is in the beginning of the description of the plagues in the Torah. He comments, we have now come to the beginning of the Eser Makot, the 10 plagues. Let us begin our study with an overview, which I've now brought you at the end of our study of the 10 plagues. Rabbi Yehuda has already arranged them into 3 groups, Titzach, Radash, Be'achav, like we have in the Haggadah. This grouping is immediately self-evident from the narrative itself. The first 2 plagues in each group are preceded by a clear warning, whereas the third in each group, Kinim, Shechin, and Choshech, comes without a warning. We've noticed this as we've gone along. Some of them had warnings, some of them didn't. The implication is that the third plague comes as punishment for failure to respond properly to the preceding two plagues. So as opposed to some of the other perspectives we saw early on, where the whole thing is a punishment, Rav Hirsch is saying that maybe it's just the ones that don't have a warning that are punishment. If you give a warning, it means that you're expecting someone to change their mind or do something, so you won't have to bring the plague. Closer inspection reveals a correspondence between these three groups and the three basic aspects of the Egyptian galut, exile, which were to be eliminated by the redemption. Gerut, avdut, and inui, alienation, slavery, and suffering. These were the components of the affliction that Egypt brought upon Israel, and in these lay Egypt's sin. These same conditions, Gerut, Avdut, and Inui, were now, through the plagues, to be brought also upon the Egyptians, to impress upon them that their lording it over this hapless people was without justification, and to make them feel upon their own flesh the bitterness of the affliction they brought upon their victims. So Dam, Arov, and Barad demonstrated to the Egyptians that they themselves were merely gerim, strangers or aliens in their own land, and hence were hardly in a position to treat Israel as gerim and deprive them of their rights. So what is that? That's the blood, the animals, the swarms, and the hail. Showed the Egyptians that they were not in charge of their own land. Tzfardei al-devar and arbe, frogs, cattle plague, and locusts showed them how illusory were the notions that had made them feel superior to the people whom they had reduced to avdut. Kinim, shchin, and choshech were inuyim, suffering that made the Egyptians feel what it means to have to submit to a systematic regime of suffering. Makat Bechorot concluded the series and finally brought about Israel's redemption. Accordingly, the plagues can be arranged as follows in a chart, where the first three of each threesome are about alienation. The second three are, the second of each set of three are about slavery, and the third of each set of three are about suffering. And then the chart also works horizontally. Each of these three groups of plagues was intended to cure the Egyptians of the delusion that they had the right to inflict alienation, slavery, and suffering upon the Israelites. Ditzach, the first three, was to accomplish this purpose by demonstrating God's power over water and land. Radash, the second three, by demonstrating God's power over the inhabitants who lived on the land. And Ba'ach, by demonstrating God's power over the atmosphere that surrounded the land and its inhabitants. So in the chart, each set of three, the first three are the land and the water, the second three are people and animals, that which lives in the world, and the last three is the atmosphere, the sky, the air, what's around. And then the other way, the first of each set is about alienation, the second of each set is about slavery, and the third of each set is about suffering. So the first group, the alienation. So a ger, a stranger or alien, is one whose residence in a country depends upon the goodwill and tolerance of others. Egypt's self-assurance derived from its river. Thanks to the Nile and its annual overflow, the Egyptians were arrogant upon their own soil, and they felt superior to any other nation. They even imagined themselves to be independent of the gifts of heaven, saying, Li oriv ani asitini, my Nile is mine, and I have made myself. This is a quote from the prophet Yechezkel, describing the attitude of the Egyptians. By means of makat dam, blood, God said to them, No, your Nile isn't yours, it's mine. If I will it, your river will not only dry up, but will bring you decay instead of blessings and prosperity, and it will spew you out from your land. You yourselves are only gerim, you're only sojourners, you're only strangers upon this land. You will stay on it only as long as that is my will. And so therefore, treating Bnei Israel as strangers without land, without power, without rootedness, who can be abused, is not what you can do. Makat Arov showed that only by God's decree do the animals of the wild make room for man. God is only to give the word, and the barrier between man and beast will fall. Then man will no longer be safe even in his own home, and the beasts will avoid only the area inhabited by the people whom the Egyptians now regard as strangers with no civil rights. Or as we might say, the Egyptians dehumanized Bnei Israel through slavery. Through the alienation of slavery, dehumanizing, rejecting their worthwhileness as human beings who have a right to be there. And so therefore God is saying, okay, I will show you what it means to not be human. Finally, by sending Barad, God showed the Egyptians, to their great shock, that no more than a nod from above was needed to cause a total upheaval in the country's climate. Egypt has little precipitation. Whatever moisture it receives comes from the Nile. Thus, the Egyptians had never seen hail before. Now, suddenly, they see a drastic change in their atmospheric environment, and the first hailstorm they had ever witnessed comes as an ominous warning that they may suddenly find themselves living under completely changed climatic conditions. They're alienated from their environment, from the way their life is supposed to be. They're used to everything being very stable and predictable. God is saying, no. Avdut, slavery. A master who feels that he is superior to his slaves is laboring under a dual delusion. First, that he belongs to a superior species, and second, that he is superior by virtue of his power and wealth. Tzfardea, frogs, the most timid of creatures, which as a rule hide from man in the marshes and among the reeds, now emerge from their hiding places and boldly invade the habitations of man, impudently hopping upon the bodies of the rulers of the land, thus ridding the high and mighty of their notions of superiority by showing that even the smallest and lowliest creatures have lost all respect for them. You think you're so powerful? You think that you can lord it over the Israelites because, oh, you're Egyptians? Well, guess what? Even tiny little harmless creatures are going to be more powerful than you. Then Dever strikes, killing their horses, which are Egypt's pride and renown, their donkeys and their camels, the beasts of burden that bear their possessions, and the cattle and sheep, which represent their true wealth. Then come Arba, finishing off whatever produce has survived the hailstorm. So whatever they think they can control, God is saying, no, you can't control anything. Okay, then suffering. Now the Egyptians learned what it meant to lead a life filled with torment, pain, and want, just as they had inflicted on the Israelites. Now the Egyptians learned what it meant, this lesson took the form of physical pain and torment. The kinim, the lice, the shchein, the boils, and the 3 days of confinement and hunger brought upon Egypt by the choshech, by the darkness. To imprison man, God does not need chains and cages. He confines him in the darkness of night. He is immobilized and dares not move. He remains rooted to the spot and goes without food until God gives him light again. And so the sort of the physical torment, the suffering of the slavery is now being brought against the Egyptians themselves, against their bodies. And then he ends. As we have observed, the first 2 plagues in each group serve to teach a lesson, and only with the third comes the punishment. That is why the first 2 plagues in each group come only after forewarning. Also, the first one in each group imparts a new moral teaching and touches upon a new area of human life. Hence, in these cases, Moshe had to rise early in the morning and station himself to meet the king on the riverbank, thereby saying to him, "Your future does not depend on the graces of the river, but on the graces of God Most High, who has sent me." Shkach to you too.
So it's so the first. I'm just going to repeat what we just said. To make sure
Go for it.
So the first 3 sets of plagues, the first 9, are designed to to illustrate these 3 kinds of things that the Egyptians did to the Israelites.
Going down, you're saying? Alienation? Is that what you're looking down?
Alienation, slavery, and suffering.
Right.
And that
Oh,
the fact that it's hard for me to understand that the idea is that the first 2 were with warning, and then the third one was the punishment in each of these groupings. But once God had gone through this process of sort of bringing the Egyptians to their knees in a way that made clear as could possibly be that what they had done was unacceptable, now he creates the plague that gets them to redemption. So the Makat Bechorot,
Makat.
Makat. That isn't in the 9 that we were just talking about.
Correct.
Isn't talking about that one. That one's the one that brings redemption, and that's after these first 9 have come through. So it's not necessarily in ascending order of severity, but more, at least his description is ways of illustrating these 3 types of slavery that these 3 species of slavery that they had wrought on the Jews, and that at the end, only then could redemption was redemption appropriate for the. It's not clear to me why that's true, because none of these plagues were for the benefit of the Israelites; they were for the benefit of the Egyptians. But that's his explanation.
Yeah. So it could be that the Egyptians didn't really get the message.
You mean that's why the ultimate.
Right, because in the end, Pharaoh doesn't say, before the slaying of the firstborn, Pharaoh doesn't say, okay, you're right, I understand now, go, be free, have fun. He does. He says it, but then he changes his mind over and over again.
Right.
And so the messages that are trying to be taught to Pharaoh and the Egyptians don't seem to actually get through to them until the final hammer blow hits. And then that's sort of the last straw.
Is that why I suppose that it sort of ties with the idea that, I know we gave other explanations, but the idea of hardening Pharaoh's heart, that God needed to make sure he could display all of this to make sure they understood the message. And then he knew they weren't going to, at least Pharaoh wouldn't back down, but it was God's way of saying, okay, here I'm going to be able to show you in these plagues all of these messages and get my message out, and so it wouldn't have made sense for as we discussed earlier, for them to let the people go because the message wouldn't have been completed.
Yeah. Makes sense.
But it really didn't end there because the Pharaoh then took the officers and he had them dress up their chariots,
right.
And he went after them at the parting of the sea.
Right.
So he still didn't learn his lesson.
True, which just goes to show how people can get really stuck in a certain way of thinking and a certain way of doing. And I mean, his whole world was falling apart around him, and he just couldn't let go.
Which is an interesting juxtaposition between that midrash we read about how the one that bothered Bob so much, about how they were all happy because they realized how bad they had been and all that, juxtaposing that to Pharaoh's reaction, which is, I'm mad as hell and I'm going to go get those people because they killed my son.
Right.
And maybe that the midrash helps us understand that so maybe it wasn't really the people that were so bad, but Pharaoh, and that him as God of that world had to be shown, no, you aren't really the God. And so we see this, the juxtaposition between how the people react and how, in the midrash anyway, and how Pharaoh reacts.
Sounds good. Makes a lot of sense. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
You're off to you.
Good, okay.
And have a really good Pesach.
So I was looking up Ken Chelst,
Okay.
and I couldn't